Good afternoon. I'm Anuj Mehrotra. I'm the Dean of the George Washington University School of Business, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this first episode in George Talks Business series for the spring session. Also, since it's still January, let me all start by wishing you all a Happy New Year and a Happy New Decade. Today is a very special day. Today we have, our guest today is His Excellency George Cristian Maior, who is the Ambassador of Romania to US, and he is also a GW alum who got his LLM here. So we are honored to have you today here, Your Excellency, and thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here again at my alma mater, and it's a great honor.
Well, thank you very much again. And let me start by perhaps asking you to give a short story about your career, how you started, and what led you into pursuing a career of diplomacy.
Well, thank you. I came to Washington and graduated here from the law school back in '91. Let's remember that it was a very interesting year in terms of international politics. Countries like Romania, other countries from Central Europe were just coming out from the dark period of, I will say, and I'm not using big words, of communism, and rediscovering freedom, the market economy, and my intention was to help the new government to quickly readapt and reintegrate in the international life as a solid democratic country. That's why I chose diplomacy, because through diplomacy you can achieve many important things for your country in terms of the evolution of the country, in terms of promoting your national interest and developing relations in the world.
So you have had an amazing and distinguished career as a diplomat, and over the career you have, of course, there has been certain transitions. What has helped you manage those transitions in what I would say very few people get to be where you are in terms of diplomatic careers, and what has helped you achieve that?
Well, first of all, education. I think it's fundamental, even from the early periods of your educational life, to learn as much as possible in order to be capable of quickly adapting to various circumstances that might come in your career. And the only basic knowledge and fundamental knowledge to do that is given by your education and history in education.
Well, I hope GW played a good role in that.
It did, of
and
course.
So let me say this. I think from some of our perspective, one of the biggest skills to be a successful diplomat is the ability to network, ability to be able to get people on the same table, so to speak, and negotiate and things of that kind. What would you agree? What are the skill sets that in your mind have really helped you being a successful diplomat that you are?
You're right. I mean, diplomacy is about aligning interests that might diverge between countries, between personalities, even between governments and sometimes societies. It's the opposite of conflict, of course. It's the opposite of war. It's about negotiation. It's about enhancing your national interest in cooperation with other national interests. It's about generating new friends. It's about explaining your interests to other cultures. It's about understanding other cultures. So there are many aspects related to diplomacy. Some might say it's an art, but it's also, in a way, a science, because there's little room for mistakes in such, and the responsibility is very big.
I understand. So in your career, you have had an amazing opportunity to meet with so many world leaders, and you meet with leaders all the time. So I want to hear, we are in a business school today, so I want to hear a little bit about what qualities have you noticed in leaders which you have admired, And what are those successful qualities that a leader might have? And I would venture to say that there are certain qualities that both leaders and diplomats would share. And what are those? What is that intersection of qualities that you might want to talk about?
Well, main quality of a leader is to try to transcend the immediate historical context and have the courage to take decisions that sometimes might be even unpopular during a certain moment in the history of that country. I think a leader must be capable of also understanding the other's needs and evaluate very quickly a situation which might influence the lives of many. And I met many leaders that were capable of doing that, also leaders that have failed, unfortunately, in doing that. But this is life in diplomacy, in international politics, which is an arena of sometimes struggle and competition.
So let me ask you a different question. So you spend your, you have so many different responsibilities, and there are a lot of things that you have to work and I want to get some kind of a lens inside a diplomat's life. Is there a day which is typical? What would be a typical day for a diplomat?
Well, the mythology of diplomacy says that there are many receptions, and indeed there are. If you are here in DC, imagine that each state is represented here, so if you go to each reception, that's clearly each day of the year, almost so 2 days interruption occupied. But apart from this, you have many meetings, many discussions, many conferences to attend, also bilateral, multilateral. Each day it's a challenge in terms of, again, promoting your country's interest and trying to understand, on the other hand, developments in the host country and trying to inform correctly your government about dynamics in that countries, in that society, opportunities that might arise.
Well, that leads us to maybe a couple of questions on Romania, trade, and foreign policy. And talking about that, I think at this point we have a pretty strategic relationship between Romania and US. And I wanted to get us some sense of a brief history of how that has developed and what your views are on that.
As we have a strong strategic partnership with US, it was initiated during a very historical visit by one of your former presidents, President Clinton, more than 20 years ago. It's a partnership that comprises many dimensions of our common interests. Of course, defense, it's very significant. We are members of NATO, both Romania and US, and we in Romania live in a very interesting geopolitical, I will say, area with many challenges, and this generates a strong communication in terms of defense with your country, but also this partnership covers trade and economics, and it has developed extraordinary in the last, I will say, 15 years. Many American companies that have, and big companies that have invested in Romania, like, for example, just give this example, Ford, that has the largest plant in Central and Eastern Europe in Romania, but others in IT, in energy, and there's many possibilities still to develop this for the future.
So you mentioned NATO. I believe Romania joined NATO in 2004.
Yes.
I was wondering if you had a role to play at that time. What was your experience, and what, if any, you played a role in that?
Yes, as a diplomat, I headed the negotiations for our accession into the North Atlantic Alliance. It was a big historical step for Romania to be included in such a tested alliance, tested by history. It's the oldest alliance that has survived many stages in the evolution of politics. It's about collective defense and preserving peace in Europe and with the cooperation of US in the Euro-Atlantic area. So it was a challenging time for Romania, many transformations that had to be pursued not only in the military but also in the entire strategic culture, I would say, of the country. And I was very honored to lead that negotiation and that discussion with NATO. I'm proud that it was successful. Now Romania is one of the largest contributor to NATO collective security in many aspects, and it's playing a big role again in an area of great challenges of Europe, this so-called eastern frontier of NATO, facing challenges in the Black Sea area, in the Baltic area. We saw developments that were negative in terms of international stability and security in those areas, and Romania is trying to promote security and stability in such a region.
Very good to hear. So let me ask you, as somebody from Eastern Europe, what are the perceptions of U.S. foreign policy that, from that lens?
Interesting question. Of course, in Romania, I will say the public opinion, and this is tested by opinion polls, views America as its closest allied and friend. And this is due to many factors, including security, including economic relationships, trade relationship, cultural relationship in a wider context. Of course, I think many in Central and Eastern Europe looks at America as a guarantor of stability and security in the Euro-Atlantic area in a period of great dynamics and flux and unpredictability in international relations. That is why we view America as a friend and as a colleague in terms of promoting common interest.
Great. So let's shift gears a little bit, and perhaps if I may ask you about some of the economic opportunities from that lens and that are there in Romania, and how you perceive potentially the EU and what your perceptions of the EU are.
Yes, Romania joined the EU later than NATO in 2007. For those that might not know, it will be the sixth largest member of the European Union after Brexit in terms of the population of the country, in terms of the size and the territory, and also the potential of the economy. Now it has the fastest growing economy in EU with almost 5% annually, which is sustained in the last years. That's a big figure for a European country, member of the EU. Last year, we've held for the first time in our short history as a EU member the presidency of the European Union Council in a period of great transition. I mentioned Brexit, for example, which poses so many challenges in economics, in trade for Europe. And we managed to create a good environment for discussions of this complicated issue. There are many opportunities because the economy is very diverse. It's capable of developing various areas of economic interest, from energy to the IT sector, which is one of the most dynamics in Central and Eastern Europe, manufacturing, agriculture. So great potential over there, which is in fact being materialized as we speak in terms of investments, in terms of opportunities taken by various investors from Europe or from US or from around the world.
Sure. So you mentioned all these, but I was also wondering if Romania has a lot of trade relationships or economic relationships with Asian economies or with some other emerging nations, and would you, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, we do. We have a trade relationship with China that goes back decades, with many countries from the Middle East also, traditionally. It's very diversified in terms of trade and commerce around the world, this interaction. But the main trade area for us is, of course, Europe and the European Union and US. That's the main structure.
Yeah.
More than 60% to 70% of the commerce and trade of Romania is done in this area.
Right. So earlier you mentioned the technology sector, and I believe a few years ago you had spoken at GW on the area of cybersecurity, and I was wondering what, in today's date, in so many years have elapsed, on how you feel that has changed, and what is the biggest threat that one could think in terms of cybersecurity today?
Cybersecurity poses many challenges. We've detected this long time ago in Romania, other countries from Central and Eastern Europe, in terms of the vulnerabilities that can be generated in the infrastructure, the whole infrastructure of a country. We are trying to develop systems for preventing cyber attacks, good defense systems in this respect. Early detection is very, very important, but also cooperation and exchange of knowledge with other like-minded countries is very significant. And I'm glad that this is an area where we have developed a fantastic relationship with the US, including in terms of, for example, implementing those new technologies like 5G, which will completely alter the environment that we live in terms, for the better, of course, but with many opportunities, but also many challenges that we have to have in mind.
Yeah. So one of the things, of course, technology is changing a lot of different things, and I wanted your view from your vantage point as to how technology will enable our economic prosperity, or what is Romania doing, for example, to prepare for technological changes, which are obviously happening all the time.
Well, I told you we have a very dynamic IT sector. In fact, in terms of IT engineers per capita, I think we have the highest rate in Europe. Good polytechnical schools that produces knowledge in this field. I believe that the interaction between new technologies, innovation, and a traditional business and economic environment will only increase, and then needs adaptation, quick adaptations of economic actors to these new technologies, make use of opportunities given by those, and trying to stay ahead of the technological evolution in terms of how we do business. We have for example, in the northwestern part of Romania, the area, so-called Transylvania area, very beautiful, by the way, we have a great IT hub for Central and Eastern Europe, and this is really pushing forward the economy, or the new economy, as we call them, in terms of its potential.
Great. So in a couple of minutes, we'll open it up for a few questions from the audience. If you have a question, please go ahead and stand behind that mic. But before we do that, let me ask you a question on the state of higher education overall in Romania, and some of the things. I believe you're familiar with what we are doing at George Washington University, for example. What are things that we can learn from each other in terms of higher education?
I admire your strategy in terms of developing your educational system here at business school, also with more focused and modular lectures and courses, and programs. I think this is good in terms of quickly trying to understand these new technological and competitive dynamics that we have to face in the economies. I think we can learn that better from you. We have a more European inclined, let's say, pedagogical system, which is very solid in terms of providing knowledge, but we have to be more flexible in terms of quick adaptation with new programs, innovative programs to such developments. And I think here you do a good job.
Well, thank you. Very well said. And I think please go ahead and line up behind the mic for questions if you have a question. But I'll ask the first question on behalf of the students in terms of we teach in our school and in other schools as well. The students, the importance of really understanding international financial, economical, political, and cultural issues.
Yes.
And I want your opinion on how you view the business culture to be different between US and Romania, and of course, the importance of really learning all these factors that I just talked about from the perspectives of students.
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I get back again a bit to the dramatic evolution in terms of the business culture in Central and in Eastern Europe overall. Let's not forget that only 30 years have passed since the fall of communism. We practically had an anniversary last year, 30 years since the fall of communism in Central and Eastern Europe. Countries like Romania, Poland, Czech Republic, etc., were dragged into a very rigid and inflexible economic system based on a command economy. Imagine that those countries had to pursue a revolutionary transition towards the market-oriented economy that generated sometimes great social sacrifices. So I wanted you to know this historical context, which was very complex for those countries, but to their merit, they adapted quickly and even used this as an opportunity in terms of burning some stages, for example, in the development of their economies and their trade structure. I mean here most of all quickly adapting the IT sector inside the engine of the economy, and with this pushing forward and burning some stages in the evolutions of the economy. So it's a business culture in many ways similar with yours over here, of course with the European tradition in terms of having much more, I would say, inclination towards also the social dimension of things. For example, higher education and education in many countries of Central and Eastern Europe, including Romania, is free. That's very traditionally in our culture, which is different
That's
from
right.
Europe. But again, in terms of mentalities, in terms of innovation, entrepreneurship, we're on a similar path.
Thank you. So let's go to the audience for a question. Please go ahead and state your name and ask your question.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency. My name is Tristan McClelland. I'm a first-year student here. And my question is about, to what extent, if any, might Romania play a role in China's Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, of course, there is a scheme of cooperation that was developed between China and countries from Central and Eastern Europe, the so-called 1+17 format. That means that each year we have a conference with the leaders from Central and Eastern Europe and the Chinese leaders on trying to identify opportunities in terms of trade, in terms of investment, in terms of economics. However, our main focus is on the Euro-Atlantic, the so-called Euro-Atlantic area in terms of trade and investment, and we view this as complementary to our interests. You mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative. Of course, there are many ramifications in Central and Eastern Europe related to this. For example, in Greece, you know very well, one of their main ports, Piraeus, it's linked to these initiatives. We are very close to Greece in terms of geography and interest. And I think there's possibilities over there. Thank you.
Great. So let me bring you back to the days when you were a GW student and you were pursuing your LLM here. I know every time I meet with alumni, they say the school has changed, the university has changed over a period of time, and that's probably true for many universities. But one thing about GW that has not changed is its location and the locational advantage that we have. And we often, that creates a lot of only a GW type of experiences. And I was wondering if you could recall something from your stay at GW. First of all, what attracted you to GW? And then if you can think of some of what was your only at GW moment that you recall fondly.
Yes, we speak often in diplomacy about strategic locations of countries. Now we can speak about a strategic location of a university in the capital of US. I think this is fantastic in terms of opportunities for students. I remember that I was amazed of the possibilities I had to interact with various circles in terms of politics, in terms of economic debates, in terms of access to think tanks and many issues that are being debated here in DC that are so interesting for students. So my advice for students is to concentrate, of course, on their courses, lectures, but also to make use as much as possible of this external environment, which is unique for a university like GW in US.
Thank you, and I think you are providing one of those unique opportunities for our students today, and they are here for that. So let me take one more question from the audience. Please go ahead and state your name.
Matthew.
Ask your question, yeah.
Many of the young and well-educated Romanians over the course of the past decade have left the country for
That's true.
other European Union nations in search of better opportunities. What do you think that Romania as a country can do to retain its youth and its
That's a very good question, Matthew. I mentioned, for example, the fact that in Romania we have the highest percentage of IT engineers per capita produced by our universities, many of them in search for better opportunities, and still there are in Europe or US, after a year or two of working in Romania, are quickly recruited by big companies. I visited recently, for example, Microsoft in Seattle, and I was amazed to see that one of the most spoken language over there, apart from English, was Romanian. It's creating, this is a problem for the country. The only solution is, and we are trying to do that, it's create a better economic environment for the IT sector. And the government, for example, has canceled taxation for the first years in the IT sector, which is creating an incentive. But most important, the most important thing is the fact that countries, and not only Romania, because this is a phenomenon that it's, we can witness in other EU members from Central and Eastern Europe, is to catch up very quickly in terms of their economic situation, social situation with countries from the old Europe, as some label it, from Western, classical Western Europe, in terms of being able to be at the same level and alleviate this discrepancy that existed historically between their development and the development in Western Europe. And that's the idea of the European Union also in terms of allocating cohesion, so-called cohesion funds and structural funds for those countries to catch up quickly. I'm almost sure that in a few years this won't remain a problem for those countries.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Maior, this has been,
Thank you.
you're covering for such a breadth of topics. It's been amazing to have you here.
Thank you.
We really are honored to have you here today. George Talks Business will continue on Monday, and our guest on Monday will be Mr. Mauricio Ortiz, who is the President of Latin American Operations at Boston Scientific Corporation. Thank you for being here today, and look forward to seeing you then. Thank you again.
Thank you, and great success. Thank you.